He finally rescued me, my sister said, holding up her ring for the whole room to see, from a broke, jealous sister who spent her entire life resenting me for having a better life. 50 guests raised their champagne glasses. I stood near the back of the ballroom in a dress that cost more than my sister probably assumed I could afford, and I smiled at Brianna the exact same way I'd been smiling for the past 11 months. Because standing beside me, quietly finishing his drink, was a man Brianna hadn't noticed yet. A man with a badge in his jacket pocket. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, hit the like button now. If you've ever stayed silent while someone underestimated you, comment here below. And subscribe to Story Retribution because today's ending proves that karma always arrives, just not when people expect it. Brianna is my younger sister by 2 years. Growing up, she was always the one who wanted more than what we had. Designer things our parents couldn't afford, a lifestyle that always felt just out of reach. I became a software engineer after college, disciplined and careful with money, building slowly toward the kind of stability I actually wanted, rather than the appearance of it. Brianna bounced between retail jobs and expensive tastes, always somehow living beyond whatever she was earning, and I'd learned over the years not to ask too many questions about how. The small betrayal happened about 2 years ago when I noticed a strange charge on one of my credit cards, $60 at a store I didn't recognize. I called the company, assumed it was fraud, got it reversed, and didn't think much more about it. Small mistakes happen. I moved on. The bigger betrayal, the one that unraveled everything, started about 14 months ago when I applied for a mortgage pre-approval to buy my first condo. The loan officer paused during our call, her voice careful. I'm showing an existing auto loan and 2 credit cards under your social security number that don't appear in your credit history summary from last year, she said. Were you aware of these accounts? I wasn't. My stomach dropped as she read off the details. A car loan for a vehicle I'd never purchased, 2 credit cards opened over the past year, with balances totaling nearly $22,000, all tied directly to my identity. I spent the following weeks in the exhausting, disorienting process anyone who's experienced identity theft knows intimately, freezing my credit, filing fraud reports, requesting detailed account records from each creditor, trying to understand exactly how someone had gotten enough of my personal information to open accounts this substantial without my knowledge. The fraud reports eventually gave me something concrete: the physical address associated with the fraudulently opened accounts. It wasn't some anonymous scammer working from overseas. It was Brianna's apartment. I sat with that information for several days before I let myself fully process it. My own sister had been using my identity for over a year, financing a lifestyle I'd noticed getting steadily more extravagant on social media. A new car, designer bags, a nicer apartment than her retail job should have reasonably supported. All of it quietly built on credit, opened in my name, debt I would eventually be legally responsible for if I didn't act. I didn't confront her immediately. Something in me, the same careful instinct that made me good at my job, told me I needed more than a single fraud report before accusing my own sister of something this serious. I hired an identity theft recovery specialist, a methodical woman named Ms. Okafor, who helped me build a formal, documented case. We obtained detailed records from each creditor showing the exact dates the accounts were opened, the IP addresses used during the applications, and, critically, security camera footage from one of the dealerships where the fraudulent auto loan had been processed in person. The footage, when it finally arrived 6 weeks into the investigation, showed Brianna sitting at the dealership finance desk, presenting an ID that combined my personal information with her own photograph, signing loan documents under my name with a signature that, upon forensic comparison, matched neither of our authenticated signatures exactly, but was clearly an attempt to replicate mine. I also discovered, through IP address logs from the fraudulently opened credit card applications, that both accounts had been opened from Brianna's home internet network. Using a laptop registered to her under warranty records, I was able to subpoena through Ms. Okafor's connections. The evidence was undeniable. My own sister had stolen my identity, methodically, over more than a year, to fund a lifestyle she used to publicly present herself as successful, independent, and thriving. All while I quietly absorbed the damage to my credit. My mortgage application delayed for months while the fraud was investigated and resolved. I still didn't confront her directly. Ms. Okafor and I worked with a detective, a patient, thorough man named Detective Ruiz, who explained that pursuing formal charges would require a careful documentation and, ideally, avoiding tipping Brianna off before the case was fully built, since identity theft cases could become significantly harder to prosecute if the accused had time to destroy evidence or claim ignorance convincingly. For months, I stayed quiet, watching my sister continue her curated online life, watching her post pictures from expensive dinners and weekend trips, all while I worked with Detective Ruiz and Ms. Okafor to finalize a case airtight enough to hold up completely. Then, 11 months into everything, Brianna got engaged to a man named Chase, someone she'd been dating for about 8 months, someone who, from what I could tell, genuinely seemed unaware of exactly how his fiance's finances actually worked. Brianna planned an elaborate engagement party, inviting our entire extended family and dozens of friends to an upscale ballroom downtown, the kind of venue that I now understood clearly had likely been paid for at least partially using money never meant to be hers. I debated not attending at all, but Detective Ruiz, after reviewing the final pieces of evidence that had come together just days before the party, suggested something that I hadn't considered. "The case is essentially complete," he said. "If you're comfortable with it, and only if you're comfortable, I could accompany you to the event in an unofficial capacity." Sometimes these situations resolve most cleanly when the person involved doesn't have time to prepare a defense in advance. I agreed. Detective Ruiz attended the party as my plus one, dressed casually enough that nobody questioned his presence, quietly observing the room while I stood near the back, watching my sister perform happiness built on a foundation of stolen credit. The public humiliation scene happened during the toast when Brianna, several glasses of champagne in, decided the moment called for something beyond simply thanking her guests. "I want to say something," Brianna announced, raising her glass, her voice carrying easily across the ballroom. "For years, I felt like I was constantly compared to my sister, constantly made to feel like I wasn't successful enough, wasn't doing enough with my life." I felt my stomach tighten, watching her build toward whatever this was. "But Chase," she continued, looking at her fiancé with practiced adoration, "showed me what real support looks like. He finally rescued me from a broke, jealous sister who spent her entire life resenting me for having a better life." A ripple of uncomfortable laughter moved through parts of the crowd, several relatives glancing toward me with visible discomfort. That was the exact moment I decided the truth couldn't wait any longer. I set down my glass and walked forward calmly, Detective Ruiz following a step behind me. "Brianna," I said, my voice steady despite everything churning beneath it, "since you brought up how I've supported your lifestyle, I think everyone deserves to actually understand what that support looked like." Brianna's smile flickered. "What are you talking about?" "14 months ago," I said, "I discovered a car loan and 2 credit cards opened in my name without my knowledge, totaling almost $22,000. I paused, letting the words settle across the suddenly quiet room. "The fraud investigation traced those accounts directly back to your apartment address." Chase's champagne glass lowered slowly, his expression shifting from confusion towards something more alarmed. "That's insane," Brianna said quickly, forcing a laugh. "Why would I do that?" "Wait, what?" Chase said quietly, staring at his fiancée. I gestured toward Detective Ruiz, who stepped forward, his demeanor shifting seamlessly from casual party guest to the professional he actually was. "Detective Marcus Ruiz," he said calmly, showing his badge to the stunned circle of guests immediately surrounding us. "I've spent the past several months investigating an identity theft case that traces multiple fraudulently opened accounts directly to Ms. Brianna Colton, including a security footage identification from an auto dealership showing her presenting falsified identification." The room had gone completely, devastatingly silent, the only sound the distant hum of the ballroom's air conditioning. Brianna's face drained of every trace of color, the champagne glass in her hand trembling slightly. "I was going to pay it back," she said quietly, her voice cracking. "I just needed time to get on my feet, and I knew you'd never actually notice the small stuff, and I— $22,000 isn't small stuff," I said. "And you knew exactly what you were doing every single time you opened another account in my name." Chase set down his own glass, his expression a mixture of devastation and disbelief, staring at the woman he'd proposed to 8 months earlier. "Is this true?" he asked quietly. "Any of it?" Brianna said nothing, her carefully constructed narrative collapsing entirely in front of the exact audience she'd built it for. Detective Ruiz continued, his voice calm and procedural. Given the scale and duration of this fraud, we do have sufficient documentation to move forward with formal charges. I'd like to speak with you privately, Ms. Colton, whenever you're ready. Brianna's engagement ring, still catching the ballroom lights moments earlier as she'd held it up triumphantly, now hung limp at her side as she stood frozen, unable to produce a single word in her own defense. The family reactions unfolded slowly around the ballroom after that. Our mother, standing near the cake table throughout the entire exchange, pressed a hand over her mouth, tears forming as she looked between her two daughters, one exposed completely, the other finally able to breathe after 14 months of carrying this silently. Chase's sister, standing near him, quietly took his arm, guiding him a few steps away from Brianna, giving him space to process what had just unfolded in front of his entire family and friends. I didn't gloat. I didn't raise my voice again after that initial confrontation. I simply stood beside Detective Ruiz while he calmly explained next steps to a small cluster of visibly shaken relatives, watching my sister sit down heavily in a nearby chair, the party around her continuing to unravel in slow motion. The emotional resolution came gradually over the following hour, guests quietly gathering their things, several approaching me individually to offer quiet words of support, admitting they'd sensed something was off about Brianna's sudden lifestyle upgrade over the past year, but never imagined this was the explanation. Our mother found me near the exit, pulling me into a tight hug. "I'm sorry," she said. "I always told you to be the bigger person, to let things go for the sake of peace between you two. I should have asked more questions when your credit issues came up last year." "It's not your fault, Mom," I said. "I needed to build the case properly before saying anything. I couldn't risk her destroying evidence or convincing everyone I was lying." I didn't feel triumphant. Walking out of that ballroom into the cool evening air, Detective Ruiz beside me explaining the formal charges that would likely follow in the coming weeks. I felt something steadier than triumph, the quiet, exhausted relief of finally setting down 14 months of carefully documented silence, watching the truth land exactly where it needed to. The final lessons settled over me during the drive home that night, the ballroom lights fading in my rearview mirror. Brianna had spent over a year assuming that my quiet nature, my discomfort with confrontation, meant I would either never notice the fraud or never do anything meaningful about it if I did. She mistook my patience for permission, assuming the sister who'd always avoided conflict would simply absorb this violation the same way I'd absorbed smaller slights for years. She never imagined that the sister she publicly called broken jealous at her own engagement party had spent 14 months quietly building a case precise enough to unravel her entire narrative in the span of 5 minutes in front of the exact people she was trying hardest to impress. I never raised my voice at that party beyond what was necessary. I never listed every quiet betrayal going back years. I let one detective, one piece of dealership footage, and one formal fraud report do what 14 months of silent frustration never could: reveal the truth completely, undeniably, in the one room Brianna least expected consequences to find her. Karma doesn't announce itself with shouting. It doesn't arrive the moment betrayal happens. Sometimes it waits patiently, gathering evidence quietly for over a year until the exact moment someone raises a ring to celebrate a life built on someone else's stolen name. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button right now. Tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my situation? If you enjoy stories about family betrayal, emotional drama, shocking revenge, and the justice that always finds its way back, subscribe to Story Retribution and turn on the bell so you never miss the next story. Tomorrow's story might be even more unbelievable. See you then.